Arcade Heroes.
Greetings, it's Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com, and for today's arcade operator perspective, I'm going to talk about, well, arcade machines, but more so, how do you get them from where you've purchased them to your arcade or your game room. And of course, this can apply to collectors just as much as operators, and so I hope that the insight that I can provide might be helpful to you. I've been a collector. I was a collector before I was an operator, and so I had to kind of learn some of the ropes on that, and hopefully any insight or suggestions that I can offer here will help you avoid making some of the mistakes that I've made over the years and come out ahead. Now, of course, with this channel, if any of you have been around for a while, it's possible that you've seen videos where I have received some arcade machines and I unbox them, install them. Some machines are a lot more of a challenge than others, like the Star Wars Battle Pod. That took about 4 hours to unbox and assemble, but of course I sped it up. And other newer arcade machines, which generally come in segments and different pieces, require a couple of hours to put together. And so one of the things that I would suggest that I also tried to do on there, but sometimes I haven't been able to, is get help. Especially when it comes to some of these older machines, it's just due to their weight, and they never have wheels on them. For some reason, they just did not like wheels in the 80s and the 90s for the most part. It can be a challenge and somewhat of a safety concern if you're trying to move these things by yourself. Now, of course, if you can bench press maybe 400 pounds or whatever, maybe you'd be okay, but still, it's always smarter and wiser to have at least one other person helping you out, and to get your hands on a hand truck, but not just any hand truck. Well, yeah, there can be some solid hand trucks out there. The type that you want to get is kind of what you see here. This is one that I've had for a long time by Costco, not Costco, but Costco, and it has this pair of wheels that pop out, and so that way your machine can sit on an angle on there without needing somebody's back to be holding it up all the time and balancing it. And of course, you also want to try and use straps when it comes to transporting one of these things around. So a couple people have some straps just to make sure that it's secure to the hand truck, and that way you can move it around hopefully safely. And these can also, a hand truck can also come in useful if you're a home collector and you've got stairs to deal with. But in that instance, always please make sure that you've measured things and be prepared to damage your walls, because in most of the instances where somebody is receiving an arcade machine in their house, it hits the sheetrock and damages and dings the walls. And so if your significant other is going to be sensitive about that, maybe prepare them in advance, have some wall putty ready to go so that you can patch that up afterwards, because chances are, if there are stairs, especially stairs that have twists and turns or multiple flights, then it's rare that you can get a machine through there without dinging something. That's just something to keep in mind. Now, of course, in an arcade situation, that's usually not something that I have to worry about, and so I just need to get the machines on the ground floor and then into my arcade. But still, a hand truck helps in most instances. Fortunately, with some of the newer games, or most of the newer games, they have wheels, so once we get the pieces off of the pallet, then it's just wheeling it in and then probably assembling it from there. But either way, you still want to have the tools at hand ready to help you safely move the things in. Now, years ago, I also sold machines, and that's where I learned a lot more about the ins and outs of shipping equipment from one place to another, usually domestically within the country, sometimes internationally, and I'll touch on that briefly in a few moments. But when it comes to domestic shipping, there are generally some options that you can get that will have different costs associated with them. Generally, the cheapest is dock-to-dock shipping, and that is where it goes from a dock to another dock that is supposedly at your place. Now, in my situation here, there is no dock, and so I've never been able to use that. At my other location, Ogden, there is a dock, but it's not the best dock, as I've discovered. It's quite a challenge because the dock opens up instantly to this cement hill, and so there's kind of a steep drop off, and access into the vacant building where it goes into is also not great. And so I had quite a challenge getting equipment from that dock there. It would have just been a lot easier to have them put it on the ground instead. And so what the most common option is called Curbside with Liftgate, and that's where you have a big truck deliver the equipment on, and they'll have a lift gate to bring it to ground floor. And generally with that, it's going to just be, once the shippers get it on the ground floor, then they want you to sign for it and they're off. And then the next step up, and the most expensive, is called white glove service. And this is generally also known white glove inside, where the delivery guys will actually bring it in and put it down where you want it. And that can also work for homes. It's just with homes, there's generally stairs. It's going to be cheaper for you if you just want to have it delivered into your garage, then that way it's probably best just to do Curbside with Liftgate. But if you do want to pay that extra to get it into your house, just note they're probably going to ask how many flights of stairs. A flight of stairs, as I recall, was measured at least 7 steps. Might have changed since then, because it's been probably about 8 years since I was involved in that sort of thing. And I don't have stairs here, so it's not something I've had to worry about. But every flight of stairs is generally going to add a bit more to the price as well. So just something to keep in mind. How much care the shippers might take depends on the person that you get, which is always just a roll of the dice. But even then, like for myself, when I once delivered a game from here to another guy's house, and he had a flight of stairs that was kind of an L shape, so there was a landing at one point, and then we had to turn, and it was a Global VR Swarm machine. That was quite a challenge, because that machine, most of these machines, at least the ones that are made these days, are not made to go into homes. And now of course you may have stuff like the Afterburner here, which could fit through your standard doorway and may be doable to get downstairs, but still, it's a good idea to be prepared for that. Maybe have some putty on hand so that you can repair your walls afterwards and repaint. But it's just most likely going to happen if you are bringing in a huge machine like this into your home and trying to navigate it. But you might get lucky and not ding anything, and of course that's what you want to try and aim for, but it doesn't always work like that. Now with international shipping, this is one where if you are overseas, then you're probably familiar with this already, where you use what's called a freight forwarder, and they will do all the arrangements on getting the equipment from one port to another one, and then you also have to deal with customs, and it gets a bit complicated just because every country is different as to how customs works and all of that stuff. But a good freight forwarder with experience would also know how to get it through customs and then to your home or business, wherever it is. But again, that is somewhat of a big challenge for international shipping, and of course it costs a ton of money to do that. But yeah, just if that is your situation, look for what's called a freight forwarder. Now domestically in the United States, there are a number of companies that deal with shipping. Now you could use a logistics company where they will be able to get quotes from numerous different shipping companies, and then you can take a look at that as to how much they're going to charge. And one thing that I would recommend there is don't always take the cheapest one. As now, of course, granted, it's always kind of a roll of the dice, as you may get somebody who's just having a bad day, or they just don't care. Maybe they're going to quit after they're done with your shipment. You never know. And so they may not always take proper care of your machines. But in my experience, I've found that it seems like every time I went with the cheapest one, there was always some sort of major issue. But if I went with one that it was maybe the next step up, then things seem to go fine. But it may vary for you. One of the worst experiences that I had with going with the cheapest was where the shipper said that they were going to deliver it on a certain day between a certain time, kind of like a cable guy sort of thing. And then they never showed up, and they never bothered to call me. And that's something you always want to stress, is please call me. And most good shippers will also say, we'll call you 30 minutes in advance of that. But what happened with that instance is the driver just couldn't make his delivery, but still nobody called me. So I had to call them multiple times, and they had to try and figure out where the driver was and what was going on. But they weren't very helpful on that, and that was with Estes. And so I was not very happy with them and how their management handled it, just because it was poor customer service overall, because I wasted an entire day waiting around for them when, apparently very early on in the day they figured they wouldn't be able to make the delivery. And then later in the week they screwed up the delivery in somehow separating out multiple machines on different trucks, and so that shipment of these 5 machines took more than a week to resolve, and so that was a real pain in the butt. But of course, that does kind of come with the territory of shipping multiple machines, as I've discovered, is that they may not always get put onto the same truck. And so you may have to be aware of that, but the shippers may not always tell you these things. And so you have to be a little proactive and call them and try and get a straight answer if you can. And a good company with good customer service will make sure that that's taken care of and keep you informed. But in experience, I've found that when it comes to things like that, or ETAs, very few people stay on top of that and are good about keeping you informed as to when your stuff's going to ship out and all of that. Now, prior to, once you get a quote, you also need to make sure what the quote exactly covers. And the more information that you can provide to the shipping company, the better. It also helps eliminate any potential new costs that might pop up. For example, I recently purchased 2 80s arcade machines from a guy in California, and he's got them in his garage, but he doesn't have them on pallets, and he doesn't have the means to put them on pallets. And when I reached out for a quote on these recently, I got all the dimensions of the machines, at least from the flyers, and sent that to the logistics company that I've been working with, Echo, and they came back with a quote. But as it turned out, one person followed up with me afterwards to ask the question, are these on pallets already? And I think I actually did include that information in the original email. It just got overlooked. And so the quote that I got was assuming that they were on pallets already, but in reality they weren't on pallets. And so that's something where I had to find a company in that customer's local area to come out and actually palletize the machines and pack them. Now, I was told I could ship the machines without palletizing them, but the cost was enormous, and in part this is due to the insurance that gets put on it, because the chances of a machine being shipped, say, from California to Utah even, getting damaged during freight, where it's just strapped to the wall of the truck and not on a pallet, is very high. And that actually happened to me once with the Jurassic Park 3 machine that I had shipped from Oklahoma to Utah, where it wasn't on a pallet. I think it was just wall strapped, and the monitor chassis itself got knocked out of place and it damaged the tube and everything. And so that was a bit of fun, because I had to find a new tube. I couldn't fix that tube because the glass in it had actually cracked. And so that was a lesson for me, to always make sure that they're palletized. Yes, it does add the cost, but at least currently being June 2022. I mean, shipping costs are pretty high right now as they are, but I also discovered that they're charging more if it's not palletized than if you ship it palletized. And then the cost of palletizing and then the cost of shipping is still cheaper than just shipping it without any pallet and all that. And so that was an interesting change, which again probably comes down to insurance. Now that's another thing that is very, very important to stress if you're shipping machines, whether you're a home user or you are an operator like myself, where always check for damage and always talk to the buyer and talk to your shipping company about how they handle damage. And now generally what happens is that you're supposed to inspect the equipment when you get it, and then you sign for it if it's not damaged. But if it is damaged, you need to contact, say, like your distributor or your logistics person right away, and then you can get insurance to figure that out. Now, one problem that happens oftentimes in this business is that if you do curbside with liftgate shipping, the most common one, once it's on the ground, the shipping guys want to get out of there because they have another shipment to do. And so they don't want to sit around and wait for you to inspect the machine, but you still should. You still need to insist that you do that. I mean, if it is on a pallet and it has been packed, you need to unpack it. You need to say, oh, look, I got to make sure that this hasn't been damaged in shipping. And so you need to hold your ground on that, even if they are impatient and wanting to go, because you're paying a lot of money for this thing to have been shipped. And if you sign for something that has been damaged, then most of the time, 99% of the time, they're not going to do anything about it. Insurance won't cover it because it has your signature there saying that it wasn't damaged. And so please always make sure that you inspect these things first and avoid that headache, because it is a real headache, as afterwards then it's basically just out of your pocket that you have to deal with the damages, and that can be very expensive depending on what it is, like a broken monitor or something along those lines. And one other thing that I could suggest, and this might be more for home collectors or if you're just a local an operator buying locally, is on the type of vehicle that you're using for your purchase, and is that you're doing the shipping yourself and going and grabbing something. Like I've done multiple truck rentals over the years, some just depending on the machine. There's once where I drove down to Grand Junction, Colorado by myself to grab a Neo Geo MVS cabinet, and fortunately the guy there was able to come and help me load it into the van. I just rented a van and put the machine on its back, and I guess that was kind of risky. Very good chance that it could have damaged the monitor, but it's actually still here and operating for me. So I guess I got lucky with that. But of course, when you're renting a truck or a van, something like that, you always want to make sure that the opening of whichever vehicle you're using is big enough to accommodate the machine. Obviously, where I rented a van, I was intending on grabbing the machine and putting it on its back, or I think I put it on its side. One thing that you always need to keep in mind is you want to try and protect the side art, because games generally have cool side art on it. You don't want that dinged, scraped, damaged. And so you want to make sure that you also take blankets, take cardboard to slide it on, and just provide enough packing protection so that you do keep it from getting scratched, at least if you are going to be putting it on its back. But even if you put it strapped to a wall of a truck, say you get a larger truck with a lift gate, those do cost a bit more, but I've done that several times because it's a lot easier to deal with. I've had instances with a U-Haul truck where getting the machine in, the entrance of the truck still wasn't big enough to accommodate the machine, and so we had to finagle it and get it in at an angle, and which is very tough to do when you're lifting this several hundred-pound machine into the air with a couple of guys or three. And so, just for safety's sake, curbside Liftgate trucks are the best if you can get them or afford them. But of course, it's also going to cost you a ton on fuel these days as well. But still, it's worth it for safety's sake. And there just are some machines that are just too big to be able to go into a smaller U-Haul truck or something along those lines. And so, yeah, you want to still have packing material to protect those things, because when they're inside a big truck like that, they're going to move around unless they are well strapped to the wall. But one thing that also happened to me once was that I did have a truck with a liftgate, and I was grabbing some Cruise and Exotica machines from one location and bringing it to this one here temporarily, and I had them strapped in, and so they weren't moving around. But one thing happened as I was pulling into the parking lot here, where some idiot ran the stop sign. Like, he saw me, and as I was in the giant 26-foot box truck, and so I was impossible to miss, but I had the right of way, and he was supposed to stop, but he decided he didn't want to wait 5 seconds, and so gunned it right in front of me. I had to slam on the brakes, and because I hadn't properly packed the machines or provided protection around them, I think there was just one blanket layer on them, but on certain parts where the straps were, there wasn't anything that was really protecting them there. But the force of that breaking all of a sudden actually caused the straps to dig into the wood of the cabinet, and it damaged both cabinets, and I was pretty upset about that. But what could I do? I had to get some Bondo and try and repair that as best that I could, but it still, as I've learned in moving machines around the Salt Lake Valley frequently, always overpack if you can, so that way you protect your machines. So I hope that helps you gain some wisdom and knowledge about shipping machines and whatnot. If you have any questions, feel free to ask below. If you have any stories of shipping, whether it's been good ideas, good practices for shipping that maybe I missed here, to provide them below, or if you've had shipping nightmares where things just happen outside of your control and it's a total crap show, let me know, man. Love to hear your stories. But we'll catch you on the next video, and thanks for watching.